Hello guys, let me start off by thanking you for helping me get to 500 subscribers on YouTube. I really appreciate you guys and I do not take this number for granted. Actually, that is the goal I set for this year and I've been able to achieve it with about a month and a half to spare. So big ups to you guys. Thank you very much. And if you are new on this channel, please make sure to like as well as subscribe so I can keep creating awesome content. So quickly today, what we'll be doing is to create a filterable data table using Angular as well as an external API called JSON Place Holder. I've used JSON Place Holder on this channel several times, so I guess some of you should be familiar with it. So what we have here on the page is a table that can perform full CRUD functionality as well as a search filter operation. So quick demo of what we'll be building. We have this table that is reading the data from the JSON placeholder API. So what we can do is to add to the amount of data we have on this table. Currently, we have I think 100 posts on this table. So I'll show you now how we can add an extra post. So if I click on this add post button, a modal pops up, and on this modal we have three input fields. The first one is the user ID, followed by the title as well as the body. So on the user ID, I can just type in 101, and then on the title I can type test, and then the body I can also type in probably test body. So when I click on submit, the input field clears up. That means this response is successful. So when I cancel the modal and then I scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see that the post we just added has been pushed into this list of results we have coming from the JSON placeholder. So we now have 101 posts. Awesome. So that's the one of the functionalities we have. And then when you click on this edit action over here, you have two buttons. You have a delete button as well as a save button, which updates the data. So we are getting the data for the first user ID with the number of one. So we can edit this as well. So if I remove everything on the title and then probably type in row one title, and then in the body we clear everything off and we type in row one body. So let's click on save row and see if it gets updated on the table. As you can see, this particular row gets updated on the table, and then we can as well delete that particular row. So if I click on the edit action once more, the modal pops up. So when I click on delete row, as you can see, that particular row gets deleted. So for every action we perform, we are kind of hitting the endpoint, although the JSON server placeholder API is not meant to perform CRUD functionalities, but we're able to find a way around that. So if you stay to the entire length of this tutorial, you see how we create each of these endpoints as well as implement it. Before we get started, I want to show us the outline we'll be following. So quickly, let's take a look at that. So what we'll be doing first is to create the Angular project. After that, then we'll be creating the components as well as the services. That is the endpoint for each of the functionalities. Then we implement the UI, that is the tables and the modals we saw in the example earlier. After that, we're going to create the CRUD endpoint. That is the endpoint that helps us to read the data on the table, to create data as well as update and delete data. Then we inject the form dependencies. That is, we'll be making use of both reactive forms and then and template driven forms. Also, we'll be consuming the CRUD endpoints in our components view. And lastly, we'll implement the search filter using custom pipes. There are various ways you could use this. There are npm packages you can install, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll make it as vanilla as possible. So we'll be doing this by creating our own custom pipe. So that's it for the introduction of this video. So without wasting further time, let's get right into it. We start off by creating a new Angular project. So to do that, I'm sure some of us are familiar with this. You can just type in ng new and then the name of your Angular project. But I've already done this and I called my application CRUD dash table. And what happens is you be asked to answer some prompts, and one is about routing, another is about the type of styling you want to use. So for the routing, I would say it's not required for this tutorial, so you might as well say no. And for the design, you can just go with CSS. But since I've already done that, I'm gonna clear off this field. So what I'll do next is to open this project in Visual Studio Code, and to do that, I can just type in code and a dot. So let's press enter, and then it opens the project in Visual Studio Code. So what we need to do straight up is to clear some things in these projects, because by default for every new project in Angular you get some templates that comes along with it. For instance, in the app components.html you get something of this sort in the app.component.html file. So I don't want to start off with this. This is the file we'll be using for the component view, the app component.html as well as the app component.cs. So what I'm gonna do is to clear everything we have here, and then I think, yeah, we can save this and let's try to start up the application. So to do that, I'm gonna open the terminal once more, and then I'm gonna type in ngserve. And what ngserve does is to load the application on a particular port. For Angular is port 4200. In another framework or libraries might be something else. For instance, in React it might be 3000 or so. So you can change this in the settings, but I don't think we need to do that for this project. So while this is being loaded up, another thing we could do is to bring in Bootstrap 5 to this application, because that's what we'll be using for our table design. So quickly I head over to Bootstrap documentation website. So on this website, which is called getbootstrap.com, I click on get started. Bootstrap recently, if you are not aware, updated their version from version 4 to version 5. So some things have changed. So I'm going to copy the CSS link as well as the JavaScript link script tag. So as I copy both, I head straight to index.html. So in the body of the in the body tag, I'm going to paste in the script tag, while in the head tag, I'm going to paste in the link tag. So let's do that now. Link tag. So I'm going to save that as well. So that's all we need to do in the index.html file. So I'm going to close up this file, and let's check our terminal if it has finished loading the server on port 4200. Still building. I think is taking this amount of time because this is the first time we're trying to load it up. So sometimes it takes long as that. Now, another thing we could do while we are waiting for our app to start up is to bring in the necessary modules we need in the application. So for instance, we'll be making use of the Angular service, and to do that we might need the HTTP client module and also the forms. We'll be making use of two type of forms, as I stated in the introductory part of this video. We'll be making use of the forms module as well as the reactive forms module. So quickly, let's head over to app module.cs file, and then anytime we bring in a new module, we bring it in into our import array. So I'm gonna type in the import array http client module, and then we'll type in the forms module as well as the reactive forms module. Okay, now we need to bring these three imports into the application. So to do that, I can just type in imports. Let's grab the http client module. So this is coming from at angular /common /http. Then for the forms module and the reactive forms module, they are coming from the Angular forms. Let me see if I can make use of the IntelliSense to bring them in. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but this time around I think we are lucky. So it works. As you can see, we have the forms module here, and then for the reactive forms module, let's see if we can bring that in as well, and it also works. So these are all the modules we need for this project. So these three modules are enough. So I'm going to save that as well, and once more check the terminal. I believe it should be fully loaded now. So I think we're good to go. So let me head over to the browser and then type in, create a new tab and type in localhost 4200. We should have something like a blank page also. Yes, as you can see, our page is blank. We cleared the boilerplate that's in the app.component.html. We clear it off. So right now we have a blank page to be sure that we are on the right track. So we can just type in a random stuff, maybe create an h3 tag and type in we are here. Save that, head straight back to the browser and see if it's been displayed on the page. So you see we are here is on the page. So cool. Now one thing I want us to do next is to create the CRUD service folder. I think that's the only folder we need to create in this project. So to do that, I might need to stop the terminal again. So quickly I can just type in ng generate service, and it's gonna be in a folder called service. So I'm just gonna type in service and then / CRUD. So it's gonna create a CRUD service inside the service folder. So let's press enter, and then this should take a little bit of time to be created, not too long. So before that is done, we can as well. Okay, now we have the service created for us. So we have a service folder and then a CRUD service file where we create all our endpoints, which is cool. So what I want to do next is to create the boilerplate template. So I do not want to spend too much time on this. So I already have the HTML template ready. So I'm just gonna grab it from my notepad and then give a brief overview of what the design is about. So what we have on this page from this particular div, which is I think on line 2 and then through to line 14, is just a a nav bar of sorts that contains a button that has an add post, and then a form that has a placeholder called an input form that has a placeholder called search data. So nothing special here. The button has a color of BTM primary. If you are familiar with Bootstrap, you know that's kind of blue. So that's for the button. Now for the search input, that's an input type of text, so we can type in there to filter through the data. We'll implement the functionality for that later. Now the next thing we have is a table. So the table over here we have the table header, which contains the user ID, the ID, the title body, and as well as the action, and then the table data, which corresponds to what we have in the table header, as the values we have. So these are boilerplate values from lorem ipsum text. If you are familiar with web dev, I'm sure you might have come across the lorem text. So what it does is each table row has an edit button. In this edit button, a modal pop-up comes up. Now if you see this attribute data dash bs that target is a bootstrap attribute that helps us to bring up the modals. So for instance, this has a value of edit modal form. So if I click on search for this edit modal form, it's going to show the where the modal is going to be called. So as you can see in this comment here, edit row modal. So by default, this does not show on the page. It does not get triggered until we click on that particular button that has this edit modal form. So that's the cool thing about this. So I would, once I save, you get what I explaining more clearly. So inside the modal we have the fields to update each of the individual data. So we have one to save the row and one to delete the row, and then we have to add a modal, which also has when I scroll back to the top, you can see to add a post, we have the add modal data bs target attributes, which is called add modal. So for this to work, the name has to correspond with the particular section the modal is contained. So for instance, the data attribute here is called add modal. So if I go straight down, that modal also has an ID called add modal. Same with the edit. You see the attribute is called edit modal form, and also the ID is called edit modal form. So it has to correspond so that it will trigger that particular modal. So I think that's the functionality around that. So let me save and then show you what this does on the page. So let's wait for it to load up. as you can see, we have the result of our HTML. So when I click on the add post, a modal will get triggered. When I click on the edit button, the modal will get triggered. So let's do that. So I click on add post, you can see the modal gets triggered to add the post, which contains the submit button, and then same thing happens with the edit. When I click on it, that's a modal that comes up that shows the functionality to both update as well as delete the row. So let me get rid of that. And I don't like the way this is sticking to the top of the page. So in the CSS, I think we can go to the style.css, and then inside the here we can just type in body and then add a margin of probably 10 px should be enough to at least give some space at the top in our application. So let me save that and get rid of the file, head back to the browser, and let's see if it has any form of impact. Yes, I think this looks much better actually. So let me check our outline to see the next thing we need to create. So we've created an Angular project, we've created the components as well as the services, we've implemented the UI that shows the tables and the modals. I think the next thing we now need to do is to create the CRUD endpoints. So to create the CRUD endpoints, let me head to the website of the JSON Place Holder. So if I type in JSON placeholder.tpcode.com, you can see their website, and on their website they list um the resources they have on the page. Like we could make use of the forward slash users endpoints, the to-dos endpoints, the photos endpoints, albums, comments. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're making use of the post endpoint. So when I click on posts, you can see the data will be consuming a list of 100 posts. So what we need to just grab on this JSON placeholder website is the URL that contains this data. It's all in an array of objects, as you can see. So I'm going to grab the particular URL, then head straight to my project, and inside the project I'm going to go to my CRUD service so we can start creating the endpoint. So the first thing we need to do is to bring in the required dependencies for this to work. So the first one we need to bring in is the HTTP client. So how do we do that? We do that by typing in imports HTTP client from Angular slash common slash HTTP. Another thing we need to bring in is called the map. So you'll see what that does as we create the endpoints on in this tutorial. So that's coming from at rxjs actually. So we can type in rxjs forward slash operators. I think that's all the functionality we need to bring in. So next up we need to create is the base URL. So I'm going to type in private because we'll be using this URL only in this service. So that's what the private keyword is for. If you don't intend to use a particular variable beyond a particular component or service file, you can just call the private keyword, and then we type in our JSON placeholder endpoints, which is JSON placeholder.typical.com forward slash post, which gets all the posts actually. Now we need to inject our HTTP client. To do that, we click inside the constructor, then we call the private keyword once more, and then create a variable called HTTP, and then make reference to the HTTP client. So because we've already imported the HTTP client module, that's why the app is not freaking out. If you don't import the HTTP client module, which I did earlier in the project, you'll be having some errors at this stage. So we have 4 endpoints to create. The first one is the post data. So we want to get data, want to update as well to delete. So quickly, let's create the first one, which is to post data. So to do that, I'm going to type in post data, and then it's going to take in a parameter of called data. So we're going to give it the type of any. So in here, we're going to return. This is pretty much straightforward, and then make reference to the HTTP client. So this dot HTTP dot post, because this is a post request, and then inside the post request, we're going to have two variables. The first one is the base URL, which we referenced above. So the base URL we created here. Hold on, why are we getting some errors? I don't know. Oh, we have made a slight mistake. We didn't close our post data brackets here, so I think that's fine now. Then the second thing is the data, so I can just stringify the data we are getting from our response. How to do that? By typing in JSON dot stringify and then passing our data, and then make use of the pipe. And inside of the pipe, this is where we now call our map to map the response we're getting from the endpoint. So I can just type in map and then the response type, which is going to be giving a result of any, and then we need to return the response. So to return the response, we could just make use of the arrow function and then type in return response. Okay, we might have made a slight mistake somewhere. So the first mistake I think we made was this: we have two brackets in this data. We shouldn't. I think we should be having one, and inside of the map, inside of the pipe rather, we didn't close our post bracket, so we quickly do that. And then inside of our map response, we need to get rid of this, and then I think we're good to go. We're good to go with that. I think that's fine. So the next one we want to do is to create a get data. So to get data, so I type in get data. So I think this is the first endpoint we'll be integrating, because I want to list the data we have inside the table. So this one is also straightforward as well. So we return this dot http dot get, because we are getting a set of results or data as the case may be, and then we pipe through it as well, and then we make reference to the map, and then we return the response just like we did above. I think that's pretty much clear. So the next endpoint we are creating is the update endpoint. I think this will take in, as you can see, the get data does not take in any form of argument, but the update data I think will take in two arguments. So let's quickly create that. So update data actually. So to update data, the first argument we have here is the data. I'm gonna give it a type of any, and then the second one is the ID, because we have to make reference to the data we are trying to update, like the particular field you are trying to update. So just like we did here, we need to return this dot http dot. This is gonna be a patch request. The difference between patch and put is patch only allows you to update, like if you want to update only parts of the field, maybe for instance in our case you just want to update the title, so you're allowed to do that in this particular application. So I think this is why we use the patch. But for the put, that means you're updating every field in the particular project. So that's why we're making use of the patch instead of the put. So um in fact, in this case we'll be making use of backticks because we have an ID over here. So the backticks, we can then call the base URL. So I can just say this dot base URL forward slash the ID, then we make reference to the data. So I think that's straightforward. Then we do just like we did with the rest, we pipe through our response and then return the response. Yeah, that's pretty much clear. And finally, the last endpoint we need to create is the delete endpoint. So quickly, I can just type in delete data, and then delete data is going to take in one variable, which is the ID, because we just want to have be able to track the particular post we want to delete, and the only way to do that is through the ID. So I type in ID of type number, and then inside the of the function I can just return, as I usually do, this dot http dot base URL, then this will be forward slash ID. Then we map through the response as we usually do. So we type in response any, and then return the response. So I think that's pretty much it for the creation of the endpoints. Everything we've done here is pretty straightforward. We brought in the bridge URL from JSON Place Holder, injected the HTTP client, and then the HTTP client allows us to get data from our service, and then we created each of these endpoints: the post data, the get data, update, as well as delete data. So I think that's pretty much straightforward. So for us to know if this will work, we need to implement it in our components view. So I'm going to save this, and then let's head straight to the app component.ts file. So what we're going to do first in our app component.ts file is to bring in the on init lifecycle hook. So by default it doesn't come with the app component.cs file. So I'm gonna bring it in. We can get that from the Angular slash core. Another thing we need to bring in is the form builder as well as the form group. So let's quickly do that. So I'm gonna import form builder as well as form group. All these can be gotten from at Angular slash forms. So the last thing we need to bring in is our CRUD service. So we can do that with the use of IntelliSense. So let me show you what I mean by that. So we're gonna create a constructor. So quickly, let me just type in constructor. So inside of this constructor, what it does basically is to inject dependencies. So before I bring in a CRUD service using this constructor, I can just inject the form builder as well as the I can just inject the form builder. I think that's all we need to inject in terms of the as far as the form is concerned. So I can just type in the private keyword and then type in form builder and then make reference to the form builder we imported above. And then another thing is to create a injection for our service. So I just type in private service. So I can just call it CRUD service. So let's see if we're able to do this through IntelliSense. Yeah, as you can see, we're able to bring this into our application through the IntelliSense. Cool. It works perfectly today. Sometimes it doesn't work well, sometimes it works well, just like in this case. So before I proceed, let me quickly make reference to our form group. To do that, I'm going to create a variable called form value. We're going to use this when we want to work with our model. So, but I just want to make sure that we're referencing each of the things we are brought in into this application. So I'm just going to type in form group. For now, we would not be working with it. So let's just have it down. And we're having a warning property form value has no initializer. So let's just can just put in an exclamation mark to get rid of that error. So another thing we have not worked with among those we brought in is the on init. So to do that, I can just type in implement, then paste in the on init. Now our app is freaking out because we haven't injected the on init in our application. So quickly we can just do that by typing in ng on init. It's more like a function, but it's a lifecycle hook that loads out anything within it when they uploads the first time. So it's kind of a very cool life cycle hook, one of the most popular in Angular actually. So now let's inject our first endpoints. The first one we will be working with is to get data. So which is here, get data in our service CRUD service.ch file. Let's create a function. Let's call it get all data, and then inside the get all data we can just type in this dot service. Remember, we've injected the service live dependency in this application, so we can always make reference to every function we have in the CRUD service file. So the service we need is called get data, so I'm going to make reference to that. So it returns some sort of, we need to subscribe to it actually. So quickly I just subscribe to it, and then it returns a response. So I can just type in response, and then for now all we need to do might just be to console log the response. So to do that, I can just create a variable called post. So right below the title variable, I can just type in post, attach an initializer, and give it a type of any. I think that's cool. Now we can just make reference to this variable we created above by typing this dot post and then assigning our response to it. So that's is equals to res. Then we can console log this dot post. So quickly let's do that. This dot post, and then for us to see the result, we need to call our get all data in the ng on init lifecycle. Like I said, this loads everything within it when the application loads the very first time. Immediately it loads. So let's save that, and then I'm going to open the console in the browser to see if we're able to get all the data from our service. So quickly let me head straight to localhost 4200. Our browser is loading. While that is performing its own function, I can just click on inspect console, and then as you can see we have an array of 100 posts right in the console. So when I scroll down, when I bring down this list, you can see they're up to 100. Let's just open the very first one. We can see the content inside this array. We have an object called body, an ID, a title, and a user ID. which is cool. So we can bring every data in this console right to our table. So to implement that is quite straightforward. We're going to be making use of the ng4 to do that, to loop through the data. So to do that, we can just head straight to our table in the app.component.html. So we can do that in our table row. So right in the table row in our table data, or below our table data, we can just do that by making use of the asterisk keywords, type in ng4. So the ng4, we can just create a variable called post. So let's post. Remember, the variable that holds all the posts is called posts. We assigned it the response we are getting from our endpoint in this get all data. So that's what we need to make reference to. So we say let's post of posts. So with that, we have access, everything within this table row has access to the data we are loading now. So the first one is our user IDs. We are going to create some sort of interpolation by creating two pair of brackets. So just like we have here. So inside this pair of brackets, we can just have posts dot user ID. I don't know why we're not having the brackets pair colorizer. Normally that should show, which is really weird. So the next one is the post.id. So I can just type in post.id, and then the next one is the title. Remember, the data we have in the console in the browser has access to each of these properties. So we are not just typing this in out of thin air. So post.title, and the last part is the post.body. So I'll show you one more time before I actually load this, save this page. So the last one is post.body. So before I save this page, once more I head straight to the browser, you can see each of these properties, body, ID, title, user ID, are gotten from here. That's why we're making reference to that in our table row. So let me save, and then let's check if our data is shown on the table. Okay, as you can see, we have all the data in our table. It contains the title. Okay, the body is not showing for some reason. I let's check why. Oh, instead of post in the body, we have posts, so that will not work. So let me quickly adjust that, and then let's see if we have any changes. As you can see now, we have the title, the body, as well as the edit action for each of the row. So this is the very first step. This is the first endpoint we are consuming, which is cool. So let's consume the next endpoint. Back in our app component.ts file, the next endpoint we need to consume is the endpoint to post data, that is to add a new post, to create a post. Like when I click on this modal, then I type in text. For now, nothing happens if I try to post anything. So we need to create a functionality for that. So to do that, we're gonna have to consume one of the endpoints. So when we click on submit, it adds a post to the bottom of the results we have here. So to do that, we need to create a new function. So this function will be called post data. So I can just type in post data, and then inside of this function, before we proceed, actually, because we'll be dealing with forms this time around, so and the form we're going to be dealing with is the reactive form. So for that to work the way we want, we already make reference to the form group we created above by calling the by creating a form value variable. So what we can now do is, in the engine on it, we need to make reference to this form value. So I can just say this dot form value, which we have above, and then we can say that's equals to this dot form builder dot group. Now what we have in this particular group object will be in tandem or in line with the values of the forms we want to update. For instance, in the UI, we have UI user ID field, the title field, as well as the body field. So that's what we're going to have here. So the first one is going to be called the user ID. It's going to be an empty array. We do not want to set a default value. The second one is going to be the title. It's going to be an empty array as well. And then finally, we have the body, which is going to be an empty array as well. Now we need to make some changes as well in our components HTML file so that we can be in sync. So to do that, I'm going to copy this form value and then head straight up to the, because the place where we'll be updating the values are, where we'll be creating the post in the modal So there's a form in the modal. So I'm going to buy that variable in the TS file. So to do that, I'm going to create a square bracket and then type in form group is equals to the value of our form group, which is form value. Now we are able to access because our form is now bind in sync with the components.ts file. So what we now need to do is to create a form control name for each of the fields we want to update. So the first one is the user ID. So inside of the user ID, we create an attribute called form control name. So I'm typing form control name. Remember, this is how reactive forms work. I can just type in the user ID. Remember, the name must be in sync with what we have here in the form value. So it must be the same values, the user ID, the title, and the body in terms of the letters. Now the next one is what we have. What we have is the title. So I can just type in form control name. Form control name is equals to title, and then finally we have the body. So I can just type in form control name is equals to body. So the body is like a text. This is a text area. For us to be able to post the data, we need to create a click event handler. So I'm gonna create a click event handler, and then the name of our click event handler has to be in tandem with the function we're trying to create that post data, which is called post data we have here. So I'm gonna copy this and then head back to the app component HTML file, then paste it in and then give it a parenthesis. We can test this out by logging out the fields we have before consuming the endpoint. Let's see if we're able to access the data we have. For us to test that out, we need to extract the values of the form. So we can do that by creating a new variable. So I'll just type in const value is equals to this dot form value, this dot form value. Then let's, oh boy, we didn't spell value well. So we can just console log this value. So console.log value. So let me save both files and then let's see if we click submit, if the values we type in the add posts button gets logs in the console. So let me open the console and then clear the console, open the modal, and then let's type in for the number, let's give the number of 1, the title, and just say title, and the body we can just type in body. So we click on submit. Let's see if this works. As you can see, we get an object that contains each of the values. So we'll be posting actually to the endpoints we created in our CRUD service endpoint. So we're posting this data we have here. So quickly let's implement that. Now to do that, I would like to create a new variable object that gets the value of all the input fields. So to do that, we can just create a new variable. So I can just call it post object, and then what we can do is to create our first variable and then assign it to, which is an ID. So the ID by default will be whatever we have in the user ID. So I'm just gonna say value dot user ID. The reason why we are saying value dot user ID is because the value we have is what we can see in the console earlier, and we can make reference to each of the particular fields by saying dots, by making use of the dot annotation in JavaScript object. So if we want to get a title, you can just say value.title, value.body, you get the gist. So I think that's clear. So the next one we need to do is to get the user ID. So user ID, so I can just say value.user ID. Next thing we need to get is the title. So to get the title, I can just say title value.title, and same with body. So body value.body. So that's pretty much straightforward. So quickly, let's now consume the service. So we can just make reference to the service we injected in the constructor. So I can just say this is service.post data, which is one of the services we created. Then we now pass in this object. So I'm just gonna paste this object in, and then we subscribe because it's gonna return a response. Subscribe to the response, and then what we now need to do is to console log the response. Type in console.log and then response. So let's save and just quickly head straight to the browser. So once again, we open the modal up, type in title, type in body, and then let's click on submit. So as you can see, we have an ID called 101. So if we check the network, so as you can see, we have a 201 created response, and the preview shows the ID as 101. That means a new post has been created. A successful post has been created, and this is the body of the payload. It shows that ID title, the user ID, as well as the body. So with this ID, so we need to push to this particular ID. So to do that, quickly let's head back to our service, to our component CS file rather. So once again, we call the post object. So I can just say post object and then make reference to that particular ID. So we can just say res.id. We can now make reference to our posts. Remember, the posts holds all the data we have that we are looping through in the table. So we need to push to the post the new result we have. So I can just say this dot post is it dot push rather. Then we now pass in the post object, which is newly created. So that's all we need to do. So one more thing we might want to do is to reset the form. So we can just reset the form by typing this dot form value dot reset. So that's all we need to do. So let me save. I think with this, our data should be appended to the table. So let's wait for the page to refresh. And remember, by default we have a list of 100 posts. So when I click on add posts, let's just give this a value of 1, then type in title, then body, then we click on submit. So it clears the field. So let's clear this off and see if we have a new post at the bottom of our page. As you can see, we're able to push to the 100 and we are able to push to the 101 post to the body of our table. You can see we have the title, the body. So this is the second endpoint we've consumed. So we have two more endpoints to consume. That is the endpoint to update as well as the endpoint to delete. So quickly let's create those. So to update, we head straight to the app component CS file, and then we can just create a new variable called edit post modal. And for this post modal, two things will be happening. The first thing is we want to get a reference to the particular modal we intend to edit. That's one. Okay, let me show you what I mean on the page. If I go back to the page and I click on edit, you know this is 94th data. So when I click on edit, I want the data to already be appended to each of these fields. So to do that, we're going to make use of the forms module, which we injected at the beginning of the tutorial. So but to do that, the first function, that means we'll be creating two functions. The first function I'm going to create is called edit modal. So this helps us to get the value. So edit modal, and then inside of the edit modal, we're going to have a variable called edit posts, and we're going to give it a value of any, and then I can just say this dot edit post modal, which we created above. Was that what we call it? Okay, let me just say edit post modal. So this dot edit post modal, I'm going to grab this now and then paste this in, is equals to edit posts. That's all we need to do for now to get the particular data for each of the modal we click upon. So what we need to do is I'll need to console log the result of the edit post. So let me just console log edit post so you get what I mean. Inside the component HTML file, remember we have the edit button inside the for loop you have here. So what we can do is to make use of the click events handler. So I'm just going to make use of the click events handler, and then I'm going to make reference to the function we just created called edit modal. I don't want to make a mistake, so I'm just going to copy it and then paste it in, and then pass in the posts. So this post helps us to track the particular modal we are clicking. So let me save both files and then head straight to the page, and then we need to open our console as well. So inside of the console, let me click on probably the first data we have here. You can see it logs all the data we have in the first data. If I clear this off and then click on the fourth data, it shows all the data inside the fourth, the one with the ID of 4. As you can see, if we click another one, probably the one with the ID of 7, it shows the data with the ID of 7. So we're able to track the particular data we want to edit. So what I want to do next is now to get this data inside of this input field by default. So let's quickly do that. So to do that, in our app.component.cs file, you can see the variable is assigned to edit post modal. So the edit post modal, we need to make use of the ng model binding, which is possible through the use of the forms module we imported earlier in the project. So we need to go to the edit modal. Remember, we have two modals, the add modal and the edit modal. So inside of the edit modal, the first field we need to get data for is the user ID. So here we have the user ID. So I can just probably around there create a banana in a box. So inside this banana in box, we can make reference to the ng model. So inside of the ng model, let me just tab this down. So inside of the ng model, we can just call the edit post modal. So I can just type in edit post modal dot user ID. So we can do the same for the body and the title. So I'm just gonna grab this and then do the same thing for the title. So inside the input field of the title, I can just say dot title, and then same for the body. So inside the text area, we can just say edit post modal dot body. So let me save and let's see if we are able to get the data inside of our modal. So wait for the page to load. Okay, we get an error. Oh, one thing we forgot to do is we didn't make use of the ngIf structural directive. So we needed to make use of the ngIf structural directive so that we have access to the edit post modal data. So we can just call that right above where we have let me see the modal contents. So inside the modal content, I can just make use of the ngIf. So ngIf. So this is like a condition that is saying if the edit post modal exists, then help us to get each of the values we are trying to get, which is the title, the user ID, and the body. So I think this should work. So let me save that and head straight to the browser. Okay, first we no longer get an error. So let me click on the edit for the very first one. As you can see, we get the data which we have in this console right in the input field. And then if we go to the probably the fifth one, you can see we have the data there, NES Naissance blah blah blah. I can't read this particular language. I think it's Italian or Latin or something. So the same thing for the seventh one, which is Magnum. The title is called Magnum. We're able to get it. So that is pretty cool. So what we need to do now is to implement the save row and the delete row. Then with that, our CRUD functionality works perfectly. So to do that, we need to create an update post function. So quickly, let's head over to the app component CS file and then create a new function called update post. Update post is going to be similar to when we are adding a new post. We need to create a new reference to our form value, to our form group rather. So before I proceed quickly, I head straight to the ng on init. So we create a new variable called update form value. So right above, I can just type in update form value, then assign it to the form group, because this is also going to be a form group which makes use of the form control name attribute we have in the HTML. So this is going to be making use of its own set of form builder. So quickly, I can just say this dot update form value. Let me grab it, paste it. This equals to this dot form builder dot group. So it has its own object which is similar to what we have above. So the name will be different this time around. So instead of user ID, we can have something like update user ID. It's gonna have an empty array. Then the second one is gonna be update title, and finally we're gonna have update body. So I think that's all we need to do for the update form value form group. So we need to head back to our update post. So just like we did in the add post, when we're trying to create add post, we need to get the values of the update form value. So to do that, we need to extract it. So by creating a variable called value, and then this can be gotten from this dot update form value. So just like we did above, we need to create a new object, like that is, we need to push to a new object we are getting from the form value. So to do that, I'm going to create another variable called const post object, just like we did in the post. This is similar to the post that is adding a new post. So The first one is going to be the ID. So in the ID, we can just say value dot update user ID. The second one is going to be user ID, which is also going to be the same, value dot update user ID. Then we have the title and the body. So quickly, I can just say title, so value of the form to update, sorry, dot update title, and lastly the body, value dot update body. So everything inside of this object. I don't know if we need to console log this. This is going to happen when we click on the save row. That's when it gets updated. You get, so it's gonna get all the data of anything we update inside of this input field. So the next thing we need to do is to subscribe, like this, call our service, our Angular service. So to do that, I can just type in this dot service dot update data. Remember, we have a a service called update data. So it's gonna take in two things actually. The first one is gonna be the post object, the new post object we are updating, and then the ID of the edit post model. So I'm gonna say this dot edit post model dot ID. So to get the particular ID of the post we are trying to update. So we can get that from this particular variable we have here, this dot post model. So we are passing it here. So I think that's pretty much clear, because anytime we click on the edit model, it gets the values. So by getting the values, we can get the ID by making use of the dot notation. So this dot post model dot ID gets that for us. So we can just subscribe to that. So can type in subscribe, and then just like we do, it returns a response. So make use of the fat arrow function, and then we can just console log the data we just updated, because there's pretty much nothing we can do again. So can just console log the data, or the response rather, not the data. We call it response. So for this to work, we need to make use of the click event handler to update. So I'm just gonna copy this update post, head straight to the edit modal. There's a button we have there called save row. So inside of this button, we're gonna make use of the click event handler, and then say is equals to update post. I think that's all we need to do. So I'm gonna save both files and then head straight to the browser and wait for the page to load up. So quickly, let's edit the second post actually. So I can just say title 2, then in the body clear everything off, say body 2, and then click on save row. Let me clear the console. As you can see, the second row gets edited by consuming the endpoints we have in the service, and then it's reflecting on the table. So I think this is pretty much straightforward. You can edit this as much as we want. We can edit any part of the results we want. So this is pretty much awesome. So let's edit one more, probably the fifth one here. Can just edit the title 5, and then the body 5. So let's click on save row. You can see title 5, body 5. So our edit functionality works. So the last thing we need to do is the delete functionality. So for the delete functionality, let's head to the TS file, and then type in delete post. It's gonna take in an argument of post, and we can give it a value of any, a type of any rather. For this to work as well, we need to consume the service. So I can just say this dot service dot delete data, which is among the services we created. So we need to pass in the post ID. So from the variable we have above, so I can just type in post dot ID, and then we subscribe to the response. And then now we need to get the index of each of the posts. So we can just create a new variable saying let index is equals to this dot posts, which holds all the values of our posts, all the results of our posts. So this dot post dot the index of the particular posts, which is a JavaScript function. So we can just type in posts, and then so once we get the index, the next thing we need to do is to splice, that is to remove that particular results or object. So we can just say this dot post dot splice, then we pass in the index. So what we need to do next is just to call the delete post in our modal, in our edit modal, which is delete modal. So I can just call the click handler, event handler, and then pass in the delete function and then call the edit post modal inside of this function. So edit post modal. Remember, we have the ng if here that helps us to track the particular modal we are trying to get when we click on the edit. So when you click on the edit modal, so let's save all the files, and I think the delete should work also without any form of error. Click on the edit. Let's try to delete the very first post we have. So I click on delete. As you can see, it's gone. We can just keep deleting as many rows as we want. So we have a full CRUD functionality. We're able to read the post. We're able to create a new post. As you can see here, create a new post. Then once we click on submit and we scroll to the bottom of the page, we created a new post. So that's two. We're able to edit a post, which is the third part. So if I just clear this off as well, save row, we edit that post. Then if we want to delete, we can just delete that post as well. So the full CRUD functionality works well. So the last thing we need to do now is to implement the search filter. So to create a search filter in Angular, we need to create a custom pipe. So what I'm going to do now is to solve the server once again, and then we can just say ng generate pipe and then the name of the pipe. So we can just call it search filter. Then I press enter. So as you can see, our pipe has been generated. So let's check where it is on the page. So this is it, search filter dot pipe. So in the search filter dot pipe, what I'm going to do is to paste the custom pipe we want to use. So I'm going to do that now. Then I paste it in. So what we have here is just pretty straightforward. So by default, you don't need to like cram this in your head. Like look, we are trying to filter through the results we have, which is the items we have in our TS file. So once we filter through the item, so we are filtering through the title. So the item we get, we could use the body or anything else, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're making use of the title. Then we convert it to lowercase, and if it includes any of the search query, we also convert it to lowercase. Now we can save. So what we need to do is to now bring it into our component file. So to do that, we need to create two variables. So let me add to the app.cs file. So the first variable is the search post, which we're gonna give a type of any, and the second one is called the search term. We also give that, we could give that a type of string because we are more specific about that. So I'm gonna give it a initializer. So for the search term, I think we use that in our HTML file. For the search post, we use this in our TS file right here. So right in the bottom of the page, I'm going to create one last function. So this function is going to be called search. So the search takes in a post argument, which is a type of string, because we are searching through the post. So what we now need to do is to make reference to the data we're trying to filter through, which is contained in the this.post this.post variable. So I can just say this.post is equals to this dot search post created above dot filter, because we are filtering through that particular data. So we can just get the value, give it a type of any, and then make use of the fat arrow function. Okay, we don't need to open a bracket. So inside of the fat arrow function, we can just say value dot title, because I told you earlier we're filtering through the title. Then we convert it to lowercase dot to lowercase, and then dot includes if it includes any of our posts. So I think that's all we have to do. So what we need to do is to go to our HTML file, and then we bind our search term to this particular value. So this search term. So the first thing we need to do is to make use of the name attribute. So inside the inputs, we can have the name of search term, and then we make use of the ng model. To make use of the ng model, we do something called banner in a box. So ng model, and then is equals to search term. We now need to call our function. So how do we want to search this? There are various ways we can do on key up. I think that's the one I think is more effective. So there are various event handlers. So we stick with key up. There's key down, key press, but I think key up is more effective in this type of scenario. So we're gonna search. So you might come across some errors, but to avoid any form of errors, in fact, let's make use of the event handler and see what happens. So I can just make use of the dollar sign and type in any. This is a type of TypeScript way of writing things. So I can just say event because the event might have been deprecated. If I type in event.target.value is deprecated already, so this is a way to bypass it. So I can just type in event.target.value. So I think this works. So I think this works quite well. So let's save and see if we're able to filter through our results. And in fact, we need to pass in a pipe in our results that we are looping through in our ng4. So to do that, I'm gonna make use of the pipe because without this it isn't going to work. So I make use of the search filter, the name of our search filter, search, which is called search filter, which is called right here. The name of our pipe, you can see, is called search filter. So I'm gonna copy the search filter and then paste it here. So I can say search filter. Then I call the search term. Then we can just say index as I think we're good to go with this. So let me save everything. And then I think we stop the server. So we need to restart the server and wait for it to load. So now that our server has loaded successfully, let's get straight to the browser and then refresh the page to be sure. And then let's type in some keywords to see if it filters through and searches the particular data I want to search. So let me just type in EU. See, it filters through. So I was trying to search for this actually. So let me just copy the whole of this and paste it in our search input. See if it gets only that post. Yeah, it gets only that particular post. And if I clear it off, it returns to our original post. So there's no post I want to search for that I won't be able to get. Let me copy this. These things are not English, so I can't really understand them. So any title that has this particular keyword, it filters through them and then displays them among the results. So we're able to do this by making use of the custom pipe in Angular. So I think with this you're able to learn a lot in this video. So let's check our course outline to see if we fulfilled all righteousness. So we've been able to create an Angular project, create the components and services, implement the UI, create the CRUD endpoints, inject the form dependencies, consume the CRUD endpoints, as well as implement the search filter using custom pipe. So I think that's pretty much everything for this tutorial. If you love the video, make sure to like and subscribe so I keep creating awesome content. I really appreciate you guys once again for helping me get to 500 subscribers. Hopefully, sometime soon I get to 1,000. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one. Take care.